In this video tutorial, we're going to talk about an amazing 2.5D parallax style animation. I am super excited about this and you're going to love it. Let's get started. Hey everybody, welcome into this Photoshop tutorial brought to you by tutvid.com. Today we've got the 2.5D or parallax 3D animated effect, but we're going to do it entirely in Photoshop, and this is, as far as I know, the only tutorial like this online. This is not your standard run-of-the-mill, oh, we're going to do a simple 3D parallax animation. No, we're going to do stuff that normally you only would see done in After Effects. And would it be easier to do in After Effects? Maybe in some ways, but hey, we're Photoshop people here, so we're going to do it in Photoshop. And it's pretty cool because we're going to probably venture into an area of Photoshop that not many of us have really been into before. Now, before we even get into it, I must show you what it looks like. So let's check this out. You can see here, that's pretty cool. That's really neat. I absolutely love that effect. It's pretty cool. Definitely not something you're going to see every day, and certainly cool to play around and learn a little bit more about 3D and animation and rendering video and a bunch of other things like that from Photoshop. Let's take a look here. Now, it all begins in Photoshop with what I like to call my assets file. So you can see this is just pre-run 3D tutorial because this is where I built all of my assets. I'm going to hide all of my star layers here using the hotkey Command and the comma button. That would be Control comma for the PC, by the way. And then I'm going to come down here and I've got some other things. I'm going to hide all of these layers. So my bottommost layer is just a stock photo of clouds, or I'm sorry, really like nebulae and stars and stuff that I kind of mixed up, mashed up together. You can see it kind of repeats a little bit. And then I just drew these mountains down here. They're very like vector style mountains, colored them, you know, all slightly, so they're kind of fading off to the sky, but just to give it some depth. Converted it to a smart object. Then I created sort of some initial just particles in the sky. This is just with a brush, clicked a few times, converted that to a smart object as well. The reason I'm converting these all to smart objects is because this file is massive. In fact, let me just go image size here, and you're going to see, 13,000 pixels wide. It's absolutely huge. We're not going to be making an animation that's this big. We're going to be doing something probably in about 2.5K, 1440p, something around there. But if we begin with a file that's massive, we can always upscale. And when we're zooming and playing with things in 3D, it's better to be working with assets that can get huge than stuff that's going to start out kind of small, and then we're like, oh, we're kind of stretching it to make it large, and it's not really looking sharp or crisp or anything like that. But whatever, we don't need to dwell on that too much. The fact is, locking it in at this size with a smart object is going to help you allow you to scale a little bit later on. So that's all important. Then I've got this model. Now this is just a stock photo. I just cut her out. She was actually above kind of a night sky, but I didn't really like the quality of it. So I just cut her out. So she's there, and then we did some like mid-level particles that are slightly blurred. In fact, we can see they have like a Gaussian blur on them. Great. We've got some foreground particles that also have a Gaussian blur, and then some foreground particles that have big Gaussian blur. We're just trying to fake and build depth here. That's what we're doing. Stuff that's kind of closest to the girl is going to be a little bit sharper, and as it gets closer to the lens of the camera, so to speak, it gets more and more blurred. So we're just building false depth. And then we go in and we're just going to place some stars. And you can see the stars, I'm just, as the stars get kind of bigger and again, you know, sort of closer to the camera, if you will, they get a little blurrier and blurrier. Now, a couple things to note here. I have just applied the blur straight to these stars. They're not smart objects, primarily because I don't care if they blur as they get bigger. In fact, if I did it all over again, I probably would do the same thing with my particles because you're going to see we're going to run into a little issue with these when we copy them over, but I kind of want to go through that together to show you what you can do, whether you're working just with straight artwork or a smart object. So we got a smart object with a smart filter Gaussian blur applied to it. So once you have all of your kind of artwork together, and maybe actually I'll share this file with you guys. I can't share the model because it's a purchased stock photo. Maybe I'll find something I can put in its place, but I'll have a link down in the description. You can go over. If you sign up for my newsletter, I kind of trade with you. You get to go and download this PSD for free. And if you're already on my newsletter, throw your email address in there. It's not going to like sign you up twice, and you'll get the download link. It opens as a new tab. Make sure your pop-up blockers are temporarily disabled, and you'll be good to go. So let's go ahead here. The next step is going to be to create the actual animation file. So we're going to go File, New. We're just going to create a straight Photoshop document. And I'm just looking to create something 2560 by 1440. Great. That's perfect. Exactly what I want. Go ahead, hit Create. Bam, here's our file. First thing I'm going to do is go ahead and fill the background of this PSD. So I'm going to double click on my foreground color here. And I'm going to punch in the color 18. FF4E. So it's like this very fluorescent green. And then I'm just going to go Edit, Fill, and choose to fill it with my foreground color. Hit OK, and it's just this bright green. I'm just doing this because we're working with this very dark blue color. So if there's any point at which my background is going to show through or I have an edge that's clipping off, I'll very easily be able to identify it quickly. And I won't like render out this big video and be like, oh, shoot, I clipped a corner or something crazy. And before we go any further, I just want to let you guys know I'm selling a course over on tutvid.com. A link's going to appear right up there in the top corner of the video. It's all about how to retouch images in Photoshop. You're going to learn a ton about Photoshop if you pick up a copy of the course for yourself, and if you pick up a copy of the course, it just helps support what we do here at tutvid.com, and I greatly appreciate it. So with that, let's get back to the video. So we've got our green background, and first thing we want to do is begin dragging our assets over. Now, because this file is so massive, we're basically going to drag our assets over and then just close this file. I mean, you can see 1.7 gigabytes in file size. It's huge. All right, so I'm going to grab the mountains and the sky first. I'm just going to drag it. I got my move tool selected, drag it up to the tab, hold down my shift key, and let go, and it's going to drop it right in the middle. I'm going to zoom way out using Command minus. We can see it's rather large. Hit Command or Control T to free transform this huge monstrosity of a graphic, and I'm going to set the width to maybe just 100%, something like that, and then I'll scale it down even smaller, something like so. I'm going to zoom back in using Command plus, that'd be Control plus on the PC. I'm just holding my shift key while I scale to constrain proportions. I'm going to move this over. So we've got mountains going edge to edge. Great. Enter or return to go ahead and drop that piece of artwork in place. Great. You can see sitting right there over our green background. Perfect. All right, so we have our mountains. Good. Now we're going to go and drag our deeper particles over. So I'm going to drag this up. Hold down Shift. It's going to drop it right in the middle. Obviously, it's way too big. Again, Command or Control T. I'm going to zoom out. We're just going to manually scale this down. I'm holding down my Shift and Option keys. That'd be Shift and Alt on the PC. I'm going to zoom in a little here. Let's take these, put it like right there. That's good. And we're going to drop the girl right on top of that. So let's take our model. And again, you guys will have some other piece of artwork or something in there. I'm going to hit Command or Control T here. And again, I'm going to size her down. You're going to see the controls are going to show up here. So I'm going to go 100% again and probably have to scale her down just a little bit. Place her kind of right in the middle. There we go, something like that. Now, because she's a smart object, we can always make her bigger, make her smaller. She's not going to sort of lose edge clarity and detail, all that important stuff. All right, now I'm going to grab mid foreground and foreground particles right there. So I just held down my shift key, and we can drag all these guys over. Hold down my shift key, drop them. It's going to, holding on the shift key just drops whatever you're dragging into that Photoshop document right in the middle of the document. So everything is, you know, just right there in the middle. And again, it's a huge, huge file, so it's going to take a second. It's transferring. 3 big layers. There we go. I'm going to zoom out, and now I'm going to hit Command or Control T. It's going to say, look, smart filters are applied to these layers, the Gaussian blurs. They're going to be temporarily shut off, so don't worry. Everything's going to go sharp for a second. I don't care. That's fine. And we're actually transforming 3 layers at once, and this is important because I just want to just scale all of this stuff down. Hold down Shift and the Alt key. That'd be Shift and Option on the Mac, and I'll scale them down to like right there. Now, something important is going to happen here. Remember, we have these smart filters applied. They're going to reapply their Gaussian blur of like, I don't know, 100 pixels or something onto these bits of pixels that have been made much smaller. So they're going to get blurred to just oblivion. So I need to go into each of these Gaussian blurs and like lessen the Gaussian blur by like 75, probably 80% for each of the Gaussian blurs. There's only 3 of them here, so it's only going to take a second. But this is what I wanted to show you guys in terms of if you're importing a smart object with smart filters and you're scaling it up or down, the smart filter is going to have to be adjusted a little bit. It's not really that big of a deal to do, but hey, it needs to be done. All right, we're going to go ahead and commit this change here by hitting a little check icon. You're going to see, watch this artwork. It's going to almost disappear. Give it a second. It's a lot of information that's being transferred here. And there you can see virtually all the texture that we had is completely gone. So let's begin with foreground. I'm going to double click here on the word Gaussian blur, the words Gaussian blur. It's at 200. So 75% of 200 is like 150 pixels. So we want to reduce down to about 50. I'm going to actually go a little bit lower. I'm going to go to 40 pixels. Look at that. And it brings back our shapes. All right, cool. So let's take this down to about 25% of what it was. So what would that be? 15, 7.5. Let's go like 6.5 maybe. There we go. And then let's go to the mid particles, 10. So let's take this to like 2, maybe 2.5, maybe just 2 straight. Yeah, let's go straight 2. Okay. Now there's a lot of stuff going on here. There is just, I'm hitting these little arrows here to collapse everything up and tidy up our layers panel. There's a lot going on. There's a lot of particle action happening, but you're going to see when we convert these to 3D elements, it really is going to kind of lighten up the amount of pixel stuff we have. So I kind of overdid it on purpose with all these particles. All right, let's go back here and let's grab all of our stars. I'm going to grab all 10 stars. These should transfer relatively quickly. They're not smart objects or anything. They're just raw pixels. All right, I've got all the stars, and now I'm going to hit Command or Control T, and I'm going to scale all these down. Again, I don't really care about the blurriness factor with these stars because I actually kind of want them to get blurry and chunky looking as I zoom and move them around anyway. I don't want them to look perfectly smooth. We can add noise on top of this all as well, but we'll do that after we create our 3D layers. And basically what noise is going to do, it's just going to take away those like perfectly smooth looking gradients and textures, or perfectly smooth gradients, and add some texture, I should say, so it looks a little bit more realistic. Real things have texture to them. All right, so now that we have all of our content moved over, I'm going to close off this big monstrosity of a PSD because I'm not going to save it either because it's already been saved. Just because it's sucking up RAM and CPU on my computer. I'd rather things run fast and snappy here, especially considering the fact that I'm filming my entire screen here. All right, so what do we do at this point? Well, we need to create a 3D poster from each one of these layers so we can work with all of our individual layers in 3D space. So we're going to begin by right-clicking on the mountains layer and choosing postcard. So you can see the icon here is going to change. In fact, it's going to jump us over into the 3D workspace. It even says, hey, look, you're going to switch over to 3D workspace. Go for it. Go ahead and hit yes. Great. And you can see here I have everything's changed. I mean, we're going to talk about what exactly has happened in a minute. I'm going to go back to my layers, though. And I'm going to pull this up because we're still concerned with the layers panel. You can see, by the way, the icon has changed from the smart object to the 3D scene. Just letting me know, look, this is a 3D scene. Great, that's fine. I'm going to right-click on the next layer, choose postcard. Right-click on the next layer and choose postcard. We can keep, knocking these things up here and just, collapsing the layers once more. Right-click, choose postcard. Right-click, choose postcard. And you can see here with these layers, see how much of that texture just disappears when I convert it to a 3D postcard. Did you notice that? It's still in there, but not very much of it. So we're definitely lessening the amount of sort of space junk that's floating around her. But that's kind of perfect because we didn't want there to be a huge amount. We wanted there to be, just enough that it looks like stuff's going to be floating around in outer space. Great. All right, now with each of the stars. And oh, by the way, I should have mentioned, I've named all of my layers. So I've named O1 star, O2 star, and O1 star is the smallest star. 10 - star is the biggest star. I did this because like the biggest star is going to be the most blurry. It's going to be most sort of in the face of the camera, so to speak. So I just want to know that when I'm animating, when I'm working in 3D space, that, big star has to be closest to the camera, whereas maybe the smaller stars are going to be back here near our model. It's kind of important to know. So I've named all of my layers because they're all going to show up. You're going to see in our 3D scene with the layer name. So if you name your layers, you're going to know what you're working with. All right, back to this. O1 star, postcard, and I'm going to ride through this real quick and just convert all these to postcards. All right, great. So we've got all of our layers converted to 3D scenes. They're just kind of like their individual 3D objects. Don't worry about the background. Remember, that's just a visual sort of placeholder, if you will. But you can see even the stars kind of changed a little bit when we converted them to 3D postcards. They even got a little bit smaller. The blur is not rendered the same in 3D space. You can see it's a little clumpy and things like that. Again, we're going to add noise at the end to try to clean up some of that stuff, see if it can help us out a little. It can be a little hit or miss. But let's go ahead and take a look at what we've got going on here. So if I just go back to my mountains and I go to my 3D panel, you should have your 3D panel and your properties panel here. All I have is my mountains mesh. That's like the actual stuff, if you will, on your postcard. The current view is just the camera with which you're working on. If you don't know how to work with 3D, I know I'm speaking, Egyptian to you right now. Don't worry. It's all going to make a little bit more sense in a minute. I just want to give you kind of lay of the land. And then you've got, looking over your whole scene and then the actual environment, like the lights and things that or the reflective light, that's in the environment, and some different things like that. We, however, need to get all of these 3D objects into one scene. So here's what we got to do. We got to select our top star here, hold down shift and select the mountains down here at the bottom. And then we're going to go 3D, merge 3D layers. It's going to take a second to do this, but what's happening is Photoshop's taking all these 3D objects and it's going to mash them into one 3D scene so we can go in and grab, you remember we had the mountains mesh? that we're going to kind of have a mesh object for every one of our layers. And those mesh objects are going to be named whatever that layer name was. So this is kind of why it was important to have our layers named the way that we have them named, or just named in a way that you know what's going on with your layers. So you can see here, and by the way, I went ahead and just saved the file while we were at it, while that was all processing. We've got this one 3D scene now. If I go back to the 3D option, we have all of these meshes. I'm just going to hit the little arrow to collapse them up. We're going to work directly on the mesh like this. If we want to work with the foreground sort of space junk, we're just going to select that. So in an effort to make our little 3D panel look a little bit neater, we're just going to collapse all these bad boys here. There we go. So we've got all of our different meshes. Don't worry about the default camera for the meshes. We're just concerned with these meshes. Before we go any further, I want to let you guys know, make sure you go and sign up to my newsletter on my website. Again, I'll have a link that appears. Totally free to sign up for my newsletter if you haven't already. And when you sign up for it, I'll send you a free guide, 30 tips and tricks to working faster in Photoshop. Going to be super helpful. You're going to love it. And it's totally free. And basically, when you sign up for my newsletter, every week you're going to get updates and all the good stuff going on at tutvid.com. And just some of what's going on with the site, the new tutorials, the best of the best, and things like that. If you're interested, hit that little link. Go check it out. Let's talk about this 3D stuff, though. So when you're working with 3D, you're working in one of two different ways. You're either moving your 3D objects or you're changing your point of view with regard to the 3D. So if I zoom out, you can see we're working on this plane. It's as if we have a television set up in front of us and we have our little space scene set up. If I go over here to my 3D panel and I work with the current view and I select, I've got the move tool, but I'm selecting this kind of rotate view, orbit the 3D camera as they call it, and I click and drag, you can see that I'm dragging around and looking at my 3D object from all sorts of different angles. Now the green is there. That's just that crazy green background we set up. The reason that that's not moving, well, it's not part of that 3D object, so it's not going to move or be adjusted. And actually, speaking more accurately, we're not moving the 3D object. We're simply moving our camera like all around the 3D object. 3D object is not moving. In fact, if you come in here and you go all crazy with it and you say, whoa, how do I get back to where I was? There's this little box down here in the corner. You can right click on this and choose default, and it's going to restore you to the default view, which is just like, boom, looking straight into the object. Here's my camera, there's my object, I'm looking straight into it. Or in that case, or in your case, there's the camera and you're looking straight into this object, right? So we can move our object around to work with it. But one of the things we want to do, if we kind of move to the side, you can sort of see how the layers are all sort of stacked. Well, in order to create this parallax effect, we want to sort of push a camera into that 3D space to give this effect like all this stuff is flying around us. So we need to spread these objects out. We need to send the background way to the back, make sure the model's kind of in the middle, make sure all that space junk is in front of her, right? So the camera can float through the space junk toward her, and the background will subtly move while all that's going on. This is how we achieve this parallax effect. So once again, I'm going to right-click, restore my default view. Oh, you know what? No, I'm not going to restore default view. I need to rotate it up like this because we need to start separating these things up. So I'm going to begin with mountains mesh. Now, what we need to do here, now that we're on mountains mesh, we're actually going to move the 3D object. Up here in the properties panel, there's this coordinates icon. You can hit that. We're interested with the X, Y, and Z over here under this little plus arrows. That's the move option. We want to move it along the Z coordinates. So I want to move it backward on the Z plane, right along this blue line. We want to move it backward, maybe like, let's go negative 1,000 pixels, something like that. Or just, it's not really pixels, it's just like units of measure in 3D space. So I'm going to go 1,500. Yeah, I'm going to go 1,500. Now check this out. I'm going to commit that, just click or hit enter or whatever, and it's going to be moved back there and set there. I'm going to right click and choose to restore my default view. Look at what's happened. That background is way back there. And in fact, we can just go to our layers real quick and just shut off our background layer just to keep from being distracted. That background is way back there. It's much smaller because it's physically, if you will, further away from us. So what do we need to do? Because the background now needs to fill everything out. So what we need to do is we need to actually select our background mesh and make it bigger. So it's going to be bigger, but further away. It's like if I put my hand really close to the camera, I can cover it up entirely, but as I move it away, my hand hasn't actually gotten smaller. It just appears smaller because it's further away from the camera. But if my hand was, 20 times the size, it could still cover the whole camera from this far away. So we need to make our background big enough to cover everything the camera's looking at, but at a distance. So let's do that. Let's make sure we've got our 3D object selected, or 3D scene selected. Go back to 3D, make sure our mountains mesh is selected. And now that we're working with mountains mesh, we want to go ahead here and we're going to choose this tool right here. This is kind of like the scale 3D object up. I believe it's also here under scale, right? But I find it's easier just to select this tool, and you click and just drag straight upward. And you're going to see we're just resizing our background. Boom. In fact, what I want to do, I want to make the background much larger. I want it to be big. I want to barely be able to see the mountaintops down here. It's really going to help give us like a super trippy effect with our parallax or our animation and really make it look crazy. Cool. Mountains mesh. Make sure we're working on mountains mesh. All right, let's scale our mountains back up. Scale them up a little bit more. Scale them up a little bit more. All right, cool. And now we're going to grab the move tool and we're going to move it downward just a little bit. So we can still just see the tippy tops of the mountains. We're not losing anything at the top of our scene. Great. That's exactly what I want. And you'll see how all this is going to work together in a moment. And now, of course, that the background is kind of in place, let's go back to our current view. Photoshop's very particular. Any program's going to be very particular, but Photoshop in this case, very particular. You need to make sure you're selecting the right stuff. So if you just want to affect the camera and the way you're looking at your scene, you got to make sure you just go up here and select current view and not an object. We don't want to do that. We want to make sure we have current view selected, go to our Orbit 3D camera, and rotate things. All right, so we've got our background. It's huge. It's back there. It's in place. Great. Let's start pulling the space debris forward a little bit. So we've got the deeper particles. These are the particles closest to her. Those are going to kind of sit behind her, though. I'm going to leave them there. They're going to be right behind the model. Great. They're going to kind of move with her, if you will. We've got our mid-range particles, which we're going to move forward a little bit. Right now they're at Z286. Let's just move them up to a straight 350. All right, well, you know what, actually, let's go 450. Let's move them out a little bit more drastically. And then let's go to the foreground mesh, and let's take that up to 600. Let's go 150 beyond where our mid particles were. And then for foreground, let's go 200 pixels or 200, units of measure in 3D space beyond that to 800. All right, great. Now, if we go ahead and commit that change. But if we go ahead and right-click and go back to default, all of our particles also now have gotten much bigger because they've gotten much closer to the camera. So we need to scale all of those down now real quick. So we're going to select mid particles here, and I'm going to go back to my coordinates. Actually, I'm just going to grab my zoom tool here. And as I zoom, you can very clearly see where the edge of the particles are. So right there, I know they're going to kind of float right back into place. Great. I can select foreground. I'm going to scale these guys down, put them right back to right about there. And then I'm going to go for foreground. And you can see how clear the edge is there, right? So we can see the edge, boom, drop them right in place like that. Great. So if we go back to our current view and we orbit the camera, you're going to see they're still floating. They're on sort of these like glass slides, if you will, in front of the model. Now what we need to do is move those stars out in front of her as well. So let's go. Star 1's going to be right about where she is. Maybe we'll set it to like 365, give it a little bit of distance, but not much. Star 2, we're going to set that to like 400. All right. Star 3, we're going to go 450. We're just going to do these like in increments of 50, all right? Star 4, we're going to go 500. And we're pushing this along the Z-axis, positioning it along the Z-axis. Let's go Star 5. We're going to go 550 with this bad boy. Scroll down here. We're going to grab Star 6. And we're going to go 600 with this one, right? Did we go 550 on the last one? Yep, 550. All right, let's go to Star 7. We're going to go 650 with this. We're going to go Star 8. We're going to jump to 700. Love it. Star 9. You guessed it, 750. And then Star 10 ends up kind of right where we want it to be at 800. So that's great. Now all of these stars have been moved. We might have to go now, right-click, go back to our default view, and we might have to even size down some of these stars to ensure that they're even in the correct location. You can see something is kind of going on there with the rendering of this large star here at the end. So I'm actually going to just grab my move tool here and just check this out. Okay, so it's just a render. It's just a render mess up there. Let's go Star 8. I think it's this. Oh, no, that's that star up there. Maybe this one's rendered. Yeah, Star 9. So we're going to just move that star back. I'm just using the positioning tool here. And you can just grab anything and just move it wherever. So we're just making sure everything is about where it should be. Star 1 maybe should be just a touch closer to her shoulder there. Cool. We've set our 3D scene. And we're actually ready to begin the real deal animation. I know it probably feels like this took a while to do, but this is so important. Without setting up your scene correctly, Nothing else really is going to matter. Just to hit a little save there. So we really need to make sure that we have our scene set up, have our depth ready, so we can just animate our camera pushing into it and get this parallax effect, and then we can go in and tweak and adjust and animate beyond that. So here, let's check it out. We're going to go back to the layers panel here, and you can see we still have our one 3D scene. I'm going to go window timeline to open up my timeline. Now, I'm going to make the timeline a bit larger because the timeline is going to be, living large here in a second because we have all these 3D objects. I'm going to choose to create a video timeline. There is an option to create a frame animation. You don't want to do this. If you create a frame animation, there's really no way to undo it. You're stuck with it. You got to create a new Photoshop document. So you want to make sure you create the video timeline in this case. So set it to that and then just click Create Video Timeline. Now here we just have this one object. It's just one 5-second clip of this. I'm going to zoom out a little bit. If you want it to be a little longer than 5 seconds, and we do, we want this to go 6 seconds, you just drag the end of that clip out. Bam, now it's 6 seconds. Great. That was easy, right? You can also choose from the drop-down menu here something like, where is it? Right here. Set timeline frame rate. I'm just going to set mine to a straight 30 frames per second. If you're working with a particular project, you need 60 frames per second, 29.97, 23.97, whatever it may be. Go ahead and grab what you need. We're just going to go with the standard 30 frames per second. This isn't really for a project per se. Now, if you hit this little arrow next to mountains, we have all of this stuff that appears. Well, actually, I should mention, you will want to choose to enable 3D tracks in all likelihood, so you can see all of your 3D materials. Now, we're actually not going to work with the 3D materials. We're going to be working with the 3D meshes, not the materials. So that's an important distinction. We're not going to touch 3D lights. Before we even get to the meshes, though, the first thing we're going to animate is our push, the camera dollying into the scene. So we're going to select here 3D camera position. I'm going to hit the little stopwatch. Now my playhead is in the very first frame position. It's on the very first frame. I'm going to hit that little stopwatch. It's going to drop a little keyframe there. I'm going to go all the way to the end of my animation. Great. And I'm going to drop another keyframe. Now Photoshop does auto keyframe, which basically means if you make a change beyond a keyframe, it'll automatically drop another keyframe in place. But just to keep things simple here, we're going to drop keyframes sort of manually. So now that we've set 2 different keyframes, we can obviously animate between our keyframes. Nothing changes, so there's no animation. But if we change what's here on this keyframe, Photoshop will automatically animate between the 2. So what do we want to do? Well, you can see because we have 3D camera positions selected, sure enough, we still have these options down here in the corner. And what do I have here? Dolly the 3D camera. Interesting. Let's go ahead and pull down on this. I'm going to sort of zoom in on the girl sitting there, just like that, all right? So come back here to frame 1, and you're going to see that it's going to be all the way back to normal. That's it. To see what we've done, let's go ahead and render this video out real quickly, and then we'll talk about animating the individual objects within this scene. Now, to render video, you can go File, Export, Render Video. Up here in Render Video, I'm just going to save it right to the desktop, and let's just say 3D Para-01, just because we're going to have a couple that we probably export. Exporting using Adobe Media Encoder, if you have that installed, highly recommend it. I'm just going to do a standard H.264. Let's do low quality just in the, for the sake of being fast. I'm going to leave it at document size. Everything else is normal. 3D quality, interactive, OpenGL is probably what we want to do. Ray Trace Draft, Ray Trace Final, they take forever to export. Now, if you're doing like a final animation or something, it's a little part of Photoshop, if I'm being honest. I really don't know that much about in terms of how these render options are going to affect your final video with the kind of 3D we're working with. Maybe somebody from Adobe can enlighten me on that. But I know it takes forever. A 5-second animation can take an hour to render out and export. It takes forever. But ray tracing can take really long. I mean, it can take a day for a professional studio to ray trace certain 3D scenes and things like that. All right, enough with the banter. Let's go ahead and render this. And it looks like the render's finished. So let's jump over here to the Finder panel. There it is, 3D Para-01. Let's open this guy up. Zoom out just a little bit. And if I play it, you can see that just pushing the dollying the camera forward, it just sort of pushes us into what looks like a 3D space, as if all of these elements are moving kind of independent of one another, as if there's more depth than there really is. And that's kind of the whole point of the effect. But we're not getting that parallax effect yet, right? Like different objects, different surfaces, different depths in this video should be moving sort of independent of one another and giving the effect that this is a true 3-dimensional, almost as if it's a video, a camera flying through space. That's kind of the effect we want to convey. So in order to do that, we need to animate her, and we need to animate some of the space junk and the background and some of the stuff moving around. Here's how we do that. It's really not that difficult. It's just a little quirky, and I only say quirky because there's some things you need to be careful of so it actually renders out correctly. All right. Remember those 3D meshes we talked about a little while ago? They're right down here. We hit that little arrow to pop them out. We have all of the meshes, which, by the way, are listed over here in our 3D panel, right? We got mountain mesh, boom, mountains mesh, which is actually, incidentally, what we want to go ahead and animate first. So here's what we want to do. Select mountains mesh here, and then I'm going to hit this little stopwatch icon right there. I'm going to click that. Now, something to take note of. I have my playhead at the very end of what we're working on, at the 6-second mark. That drops a keyframe at the very beginning of our timeline and at the very end of it. Now, the way that this timeline editing or animating works is our background is, remember we zoomed it in behind the object, we made it bigger and we zoomed it in. Well, what we want to do now is zoom out as the camera dollies in. So the camera's going to dolly in toward the girl and the background is going to zoom out. And the effect this is going to give us is the camera moving in while at the same time zooming its lens out. So it kind of gives you this like bizarre, like trippy effect. It's a very cool kind of effect. Not something you want to look at for an extended period of time. But a really neat looking effect. So we're going to try to do that here with this. So we need to set this end keyframe to have a background that's kind of zoomed out a little bit more. And what Photoshop's going to do is say, hey, look, this keyframe is not the same as the first keyframe, and it's going to automatically animate between the two. So we're going to zoom the end keyframe out, and it's going to give us a nice smooth fade from the zoomed in background, whoop, right back to the more zoomed out background. So here's how we're going to do that. Make sure you have the keyframe selected. Very important. It's yellow. We have it selected. Great. We've got our mountains mesh selected, and we're going to use the scale tool here, and we're going to go ahead and just pull down on this to scale our background down. Now, very, very important here. We don't want to reveal any of that transparent background. It'll kind of mess up the render of the video, or at least I think. It seems to, Photoshop just doesn't seem to render animation when it sort of leaves transparent space or something. I'm not really sure. I haven't quite figured it out. I'm still kind of taking shots in the dark as to why it behaves that way. I've never gotten an answer from Adobe on it. And it's not like, you know, they've got 1,000 people asking that question or anything. I've never seen tutorials on it anywhere I've looked. And just never, you know, I don't know. It's just something that I've noticed. So we want to be careful of that. And I'm also going to use the position tool here and just drag the background upward a little bit. This is going to kind of give us the effect of the camera lens tilting itself slightly downward as the camera dollies in, you know, therefore revealing more of those mountains that are beneath the girl that is floating here. Now, to make sure that the background is working and all of this is working correctly, because we've actually gone in and animated our first mesh, let's just go ahead and export this. So File, Export, Render Video. We're going to do the same thing we did. 3D Para, we're going to name this, I guess, O2 now, though, instead of O1. Medium quality, everything the same. Go ahead and hit render, and I'll be back in just a second. All right, the render's done. Let's go File. There it is, Para 2. Let's check it out. Make sure that the background, what I'm focusing on is just the background. So I'm going to hit play, and I can see, sure enough, the background is moving. She's zooming into the camera. She's not really zooming in. The camera's really pushing into her, and the background is changing behind her. Now, she's too high up in the frame. She's a little bit too big for the frame. So let's animate her now. We're going to make her a bit smaller. Maybe we'll even make her tilt a little bit as the camera dollies into her. So let's go and animate her next. All right, so we're going to select Model 1 Mesh over here in 3D. Hit the little stopwatch icon right there, bam. It's going to place our two keyframes. Give it a second. There's our first keyframe, our second keyframe. And first thing we'll do, we'll make her a bit smaller. So I'm going to pull down on her, downsize her, make her fit in the, fit in the frame kind of more like she should. And I'll also probably move her a little bit, just down and over, and then also rotate her just a little bit. So she's going to rock backward just slightly. All right, there we go. Great. And again, let's go ahead and render this out. You can also render video, by the way. Hit the little flyout menu and choose Render Video. Fast and easy. We're going to go 3D Para 03 or 04. I think it's 03, right? And then I'm going to hit Render, and I'll be back in just a second. Ah, great. That was nice and fast. Let's go over to the Finder. There it is, Para 03. Double-click to open it up. Let's zoom out. She's got a little spot, one of the little pieces of debris on her forehead. We're going to just ignore that because we're not going to get in and mess around with any of that stuff. Let's go ahead and just play this, and we're mainly keeping an eye on her and how much she moves. All right, I can see right off the bat she's leaning backward a little bit. There's a star over here that's like wigging out. But she's moving just as she should, and she's just more centered. See how nicely composed the overall image is now, where she's just rocking right into place and sized up just right. and rotating just as we wish. All right, great. Now we're going to go ahead and edit all of the particle-y debris around here. Not the stars quite yet. We're going to get to the stars in a little bit. So here's what I'm going to do. I'm going to begin with mid particles 1 mesh. So this is kind of the smallest of the particles. I'm going to go ahead. I still have my playhead on the last frame. Go ahead and hit the little stopwatch icon. Give it a second. It's going to drop in our 2 keyframes. Great. And all I want to do with this is rotate it. So again, I'm going to grab my rotate tool and I'm going to rotate this. Now, in order to avoid having particles leaving blank, transparent areas, which will cause our animation for some reason, I think, not to render, I'm going to use my scale tool here, and I'm going to scale this debris upward just a little bit, just to kind of like make sure my bases are covered. Now we're going to select foreground mesh. Over here, I'm going to hit the stopwatch icon for the foreground mesh. We're going to do the same thing, except the foreground mesh, we're going to actually rotate that debris in the opposite direction. Again, in the spirit of the parallax effect. We're going to have things going in opposite directions. All right, and then we're going to go for foreground mesh, which is these big blobs of blue that are very close to the camera. Go ahead and add my stopwatch for that, and I'm going to rotate this back the other way. Now, I got to be careful here. I'm going to make sure this is zoomed up quite a bit larger because this one could really cause us issues because there's a really sharp line. And I'm just afraid that it won't render out correctly. But hey, let's check it out now. We go hit the pop-out menu, render video, and we're going to do our 4th render here. So we're going to go 04. Again, I'm just doing a preset to medium quality for now. Our final render, we'll try to pump up the quality a little bit. Go ahead and hit render, and I will be back in just a moment. All right. That render is finished. Let's go find her. Here it is, Para 4. And again, this time we're going to particularly keep an eye out for just lots of moving debris kind of around her. And sure enough, we can see it's like spiraling and spinning outward as it goes. Looks pretty cool. I kind of dig it. All right, let's go ahead and quit the QuickTime player. Let's jump back in here. And last but not least, we want to go through each of our stars individually and give them a little bit of rotation and maybe just a little, well, I mean, they're probably just going to have movement associated with them. Whoop. I'm going to come over here and just make my timeline a little bit smaller. All right, great. So what we want to do, again, we want to give our stars each a little bit of rotation and maybe a little bit of movement. And I say movement because you're going to see here kind of how the rotation tool works. Let's begin here with the first star. So 01 star. Remember, 01 star is going to be the smallest star, sort of closest, if you will, to the girl that's sitting on the moon. So we're going to go ahead and hit the little stopwatch icon, drop in our 2 keyframes. I'm going to grab my rotation tool, and I'm going to rotate the star this way. Now, you can see what it's doing. It's rotating based on this center axis point here. So I'm going to rotate the star way up like that, and then we need to use the position tool and kind of sort of just drag it back in place. It's going to give us this effect of like the star sort of tumbling through space, which is kind of cool. It's kind of just like randomizing all of the stars. You're going to see how it's going to mix things up. I think it's kind of neat for this effect, at least. We are just playing around with it, so kind of anything goes. But I think it's kind of a cool effect. All right, now let's go to number 2 star, hit the stopwatch. We're going to rotate. I'm probably going to rotate the star in the opposite direction, use the position tool, the move tool, if you will, and move it right back into place. And now I'm going to zip through the remaining 8 stars. I'm going to speed this video up a little bit so you can still watch, but it's going to go a little faster, and you don't have to listen to me talk about every single star. All right, great. So I think we have all of the stars animated. One of the things I'll do before I render this out to just get a quick taste test of what it's going to look like, I'm going to hit this little gear icon. I'd like to keep my resolution around 25%. It just allows me to sort of play back and scroll through this. It makes everything smoother. The quality's really bad, but at least the animation, you can kind of get an idea for how it's going to look before you render it. So now that I've done that, I can just go ahead and I can see kind of how just the sheer amount of stuff that's moving all over the place. You can see how the stars are just kind of tumbling and moving around. I don't really mind how they're moving around. It's just, more junk to float around and give us more of this, hey, everything's kind of independent and floating around effect. All right, so let's go ahead and give this a second, give Photoshop a second to catch up, and we'll go ahead and render out this video. Just pop-out menu, render. What are we up to? 5, 6, something like that. You know what? Actually, I'm going to go final. No, I'm not going to go final yet. Let's actually cancel this. I just thought of something. We need to go back to our layers, and we want to create sort of a final layer of noise on top of this. So I'm going to create a new layer, and I'm going to name it Noise. This is just going to be some grain to help smooth colors and things like that. We're going to go Edit, Fill, and we're going to fill it with a 50% gray. Hit OK. We want our foreground and background colors to be black and white. Go Filter, Noise, Add Noise. 35% is perfect. We're going to set it to a blend mode of soft light and change the opacity to, let's say, 35. Looks pretty good. And now at this point, we're going to go ahead and render out the video. So we're going to go render video, and we're going to call it 3D Para hyphen, I'm going to do it. I'm going to do it. I'm going to call it final. And I think we all know that the surest way to make sure you're going to have to go back and edit a document later is add the word final to the file name. But fortune favors the brave, and I'm going to be brave about this. So we're going to go ahead and just say final. I'm going to leave it at medium quality because, again, we're just going to go with what we got here. I'm going to hit render, and give me a second, and I'll be back with, hopefully, the final version of this video. All right, great. Let's jump out to the Finder, and there it is, final. Oh, and look at that. See that? Let's just open this up real quick. Oh, well, okay. I thought it didn't render out at all. It was showing me a gray thumbnail. Let's just give this a shot and see what it looks like here. Go ahead and hit play. And you can see, sure enough, everything's moving, everything's spinning, everything's rotating and flying through the screen as it should. And then right at the end, it completely craps out and gives us a bunch of extra seconds of the noise layer. Let's close this by quitting the QuickTime player. Let's go back to our timeline here real quick. I want to look at something. And you can see, sure enough, because I had the playhead at 6 seconds, our noise layer begins at 6 seconds. So we actually need to drag this back. Drag it all the way back here to the beginning. All right, great. There we go. And it happened to me. We got to go re-render the video. So we're going to call it hyphen real final. There we go. We're going to render this out. And once more, I will be back in just a moment. There we go. It rendered out. And see, when I make dumb mistakes like that, it actually works out, I think. I'm just going to collapse my mountains track. I'm just trying to justify making a dumb mistake. All right, there we go. Real final. Let's open this up. Let's check it out. And yeah, I can see right off the bat it's 6 seconds, which it should be. And there we go. It's got a nice layer of grain over it to help blend everything together. We got one star that's just going completely crazy there. But you know what? It's good enough for what we're doing here. You definitely get the gist of the effect. This has to do with some of our layering and the way it's rendering out in there in Photoshop. But we're not going to be too bothered by it. All things considered, we got a really cool effect that we've created here. And it's using 3D and animation in Photoshop. So that's going to be it for this one. If you guys enjoyed the video, please go ahead and pound the like button. And for 3D parallax animation in Photoshop, keyframes and meshes and 3D camera orbiting madness and bizarre, sometimes render work, sometimes it's not quite the greatest thing in the world, effects in Photoshop, that's it. Get it? Got it? Good. Nathaniel Dodds and tutvid.com. I'll catch you in the next one.